We have something very exciting to share this release for all our customers. And that is a version of the RAD Studio IDE, including Delphi and C++ Builder, that is 64-bit, a 64-bit IDE. This is a massive product milestone and something really exciting to deliver. It's valuable to you because it lets you use the 64-bit build of the Delphi compiler with its ultra-large memory space inside the IDE itself. It also lets you use 64-bit database drivers at design time. Plus, of course, it's a 64-bit world, and moving to 64-bit is something we all need to do. Before continuing, I want to note, I look after the IDE, so I'm doing the voiceover for this section, but it has been a major effort across multiple teams, and we really need to thank and give credit to Marco and Nunu, who are both online, as well as many other staff. Now, the 32-bit version of the IDE remains the default in 12.3. That is, if you just start the normal version of Delphi or C++ Builder or RAD Studio, that normal version is 32-bit, the same as it always was in 12.2 and earlier. But you can also install the new 64-bit version, and it's installed side by side in parallel with the 32-bit one. You get two sets of shortcuts in the start menu. You can then run either of them or both of them at once. In fact, you can see in my taskbar in the screenshot here, I have the normal 32-bit IDE and the 64-bit IDE both running, and I'll show both at once in a demo in a minute. Before we get into it, it is important to note that we're naming this the initial release. It's gigantic work, and we've planned the scope of what is delivered in 12.3 carefully. The new 64-bit IDE does not yet match the 32-bit IDE in functionality. It's got all the essentials, but at 12.3 it is not the same, and it's a version 1. Use it knowing it's a version 1. But that said, let's look at what's included. So, I mentioned that we planned the scope of the first version of the 64-bit IDE carefully. The IDE is a huge piece of software, so we are phasing it in piece by piece. And in 12.3, the initial release of the Windows 64-bit IDE is meant for building Windows 64-bit apps. And for Win64, it has all the things you need. It supports VCL and FireMonkey, form design, editing, debugging, FireDAC and DBExpress and DataSnap, and so forth. So you can design, compile, and debug an app for Win64 that includes packages and DLLs, i.e. the fundamentals for building Win64 apps are all here. Things that are not included, and this is just in the initial release, include type library support and ActiveX projects, the Delphi refactorings and audits and metrics, Control-J for live templates, Visual Assist, and of course targeting any non-Win64 platform. So you can see we're shipping the fundamentals, the core features, but in the initial release, not everything is there yet. You might wonder, what does it mean by targeting only Win64? What if you have a project that has other platforms in it, like macOS or even Windows 32? Well, it's fine. When you open a project in the 64-bit IDE, those platforms are hidden, but when you open the same project back in the 32-bit IDE later, they'll be visible again. I think this is easier to explain with a diagram and screenshots. So, you or I might start off with a project that has lots of platforms, and in the 32-bit IDE, they're all visible. You can see a screenshot of the target platforms in the projects view here, and there are a lot of target platforms. You can compile for each one of those platforms when you open the project in the 32-bit IDE. When I open the same project in the initial release of the 64-bit IDE, most of those platforms are hidden. Now they're still there, they're just hidden. You won't see them in the projects view, and you can't compile and debug for them as targets from the 64-bit IDE. In this initial release, you can only compile and debug for the Windows 64-bit target. Also, my example project here had lots of platforms, but it didn't have the Windows 64-bit target. So when I've opened it in the 64-bit IDE, that target platform is automatically added. But don't worry. Seeing all the other platforms not present is completely okay. When you close the project, and open it back into 32-bit IDE, you can see they're all there again, visible and usable. It is meant to be completely safe to open your project in the 64-bit IDE, make changes, save it, and open it in the 32-bit IDE. Not only will you have your changes, but the other platforms will still be there and reappear. Something new in the 64-bit IDE is the debugger. When using the 64-bit IDE only, the Delphi Win64 debugger is different to the debugger used for Delphi Win64 in the 32-bit IDE. This is a new development and an entirely new technology, and like the rest of the 64-bit IDE, you can consider it a version 1. It isn't a full match in features yet, but again, all the fundamentals are there. So, brand new 64-bit IDE, the initial release targeting Win64 development. Let's have a look at it. Here you can see I'm running two IDEs side by side. On the left is the 32-bit IDE, and I'll make that light or grey. And on the right is the 64-bit IDE, and I'll make that dark because dark mode is cool and the 64-bit IDE is cool, but also, as well as annotating on screen, this is to make it more obvious in the demo here which one is which. Settings are shared, by the way, including color scheme, so both will start out with the same theme. That's why I'm changing it live. I have a VCL skier demo open in both. You can see the VCL form designer is there, by Monkeyworks 2, and all the components you expect are present. Note that on the left, in the 32-bit IDE, I have two target platforms. But when I open the same project on the right, in the 64-bit IDE, only the Win64 target platform is visible and the other is hidden. In code, I have a breakpoint, and in the 32-bit IDE, I can run and debug as you'd expect. I can evaluate an expression, such as a form.name, add a watch, and in the local variables, expand to see fields. Let's do the same in the 64-bit IDE. I have a breakpoint in the same location. I can evaluate, add a watch, and drill down into objects. You'll note that this debugger doesn't give as much information as the 32-bit one, mostly being that it evaluates objects as their address, and so you need to use the local variables or inspect view to drill down into them. And that's an example of how this debugger is the initial release as well. But equally, you can see that our entirely new debugger has all the basics, all the fundamentals present. If I open up Task Manager, you can see that I have two bds.exe processes, and one of them is indeed 64-bit. Plus, note that in the About box, and in the title bar, and also in the product icon and splash screen and taskbar for that matter, we do have a small 64-bit label. Some technical details. All packages loaded into the 64-bit IDE, both design time component packages and plugins, need to be 64-bit. Most component vendors already support 64-bit at runtime, so we hope enabling it for design time won't be too hard. If you have your own custom components, you will need to install a 64-bit version of the package in the 64-bit IDE. In general, everything is the same. There are no unexpected changes. Settings are mostly shared, so what you configure in the options applies to both 32-bit and 64-bit. There are only a few exceptions, which are to do with installed components, plugins, and the debugger. In general, things like the recently opened projects list, or the color scheme, or any other configuration will be shared. So that's the 64-bit IDE. This is the initial release, and we do obviously plan further work over time with our normal GA caveat. It's very exciting to deliver this in 12.3. The 64-bit IDE is available for all product editions, including Pro. You can access 64-bit database drivers, and compiling uses the 64-bit build of the Delphi compiler inside the IDE. This means both the IDE and compiling has access to very large amounts of memory if you need it. You can use both 32 and 64-bit versions of the IDE at the same time. Remember, it's an optional install, so check that you install it if you want it. We're very excited about this, and it really indicates a forward-looking modern direction. The world is 64-bit, and so are we. We know many of you have asked for this, and we hope it's really valuable to you. And we hope you enjoy using it.